Hello, everyone. Minasan konnichiwa. Thank you so much for joining us for another session of Have a Coke and Tea with the Society. My name is Yoshi Domoto. I am the Executive Director of the Japan America Society of Georgia, and so thrilled for today's session as we have a very special guest from all the way from Hawaii. So a long distance session, but today I am enjoying a nice cup of tea, if you can see. I guess here in Georgia, at least, it's getting a little cooler with the fall weather. But today's guest is Mr. Mike Malaghan. Mr. Mike, hello. What are you enjoying today?
Well, aloha. Ohio gozaimasu. It's 7 o'clock in the morning here in Hawaii. Got a gorgeous sunrise in the making to the right, and clouds over the mountains and right directly in front of me. So Hawaii is gifted with great weather.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I wish I could be there in person in Hawaii, but tell us a little bit about yourself and what type of work you do.
Well, I'm a writer now. My background, I was in the corporate world. I spent many years in the Far East, 8 years in Taiwan, a dozen years in Japan full-time. And I own a home now in Japan with my wife, in Ebisu, which is in Tokyo. And so I split my time between here and in Japan. And I retired about 20 years ago. I was very lucky, and I was able to indulge my fantasy, which was writing books. And one thing led to another. If you have a minute, I'll tell you how I ended up as a Caucasian, writing books on the Japanese experience. Yeah, being married to a Japanese was an entree, but not really. But if you live in Hawaii, which 30% of the population is Japanese, and almost everybody has a cousin, brother, uncle, whatever, that was in the 442nd or the 100th, so that it's there all the time. So when I started writing books, I wasn't thinking of that particular genre, but I had written one book that didn't go anywhere, and I attended the Myers Writers Conference, and a speaker there was talking about writing historical novels, and I wanted to hit myself on the head and said, that's what I love, and I need a subject. But it so happens a week later, somebody invited me to a documentary, the launch, called The First Battle. And it explained why in Hawaii, Japanese didn't end up in the camps. 2,000 were POWs, they were like sacrificial lambs, but there was no mass incarceration, excuse me. And, but even though we're closer to Japan than the West Coast, how did that happen? So from that, I decided I'd like to write one novel. Well, that one novel ended up being 3 novels, 2 of which have been completed. One was Haru, My Picture Bride, and starts off in Amakusa, 1905, little island off of Nagasaki, and it ended up in the night before Pearl Harbor. The second book starts with Pearl Harbor and ends with the Battle of Cassino, and now I'm writing the third book, which will end with the end of the war in Europe and the bombing of Hiroshima, which will, of course, end the war. And Japanese, of course, were in all these places, as well as Burma and Philippines and so forth.
So yeah, Mr. Mike, so now you've written 3 books, 2 of which are published, and the third one's coming out very soon. I know you're an author, but also I think historian and researcher, and I think all 3 of those kind of tie in very close together. But can you tell us maybe a little bit more about your 2 novels that you've published so far, Picture Bride and then also Question of Loyalty?
Yeah, I can. And Picture Bride, an interesting story. If you want to go on a stream share there, I'll tell you how I invented Haru, one of my main characters. Let's go. Yeah, there we go. You see that 17-year-old girl there? Her name is Sue Isanaga. In my book, she's also Sue, but I give her another name. And the person on the right there is Robert Shivers. He's the FBI agent. He just arrives in Hawaii in 1939. His mission is to prepare the Japanese community that's going to be incarcerated when the expected war. There was no surprise about the camps. They were talked about as early as 1936, 1937, when Colonel Patton came to Hawaii and had a blueprint when the war broke out, what to do with the orange people, which of course is the local Japanese. So anyway, one of the community leaders meets Robert Shivers at the airport and says, oh, I've got good news for you. We have an all-par that can be with you. It's kind of tradition in Hawaii that a lot of the leaders in the community have a Japanese student stay with them, and they do a little bit of light housework. They're not a maid, but they share meals with you. And he said, well, I don't want to do that. I mean, my wife and I don't have any kids. But Shivers senses that just to say no was wrong. So he said, I'll tell you what, the girl can stay with me for a week until you find somebody. And then he also thinking, I can interrogate this girl. And he does. And his first night, he's almost embarrassed the way he overcomes her. He says, what do you like about Japan? Aren't you proud of being Japanese? Japanese, Mr. Shivers, I'm an American. I'm proud to be an American. And then they start talking about movies, get off the subject. And something dawns on him. This 17-year-old girl doesn't look like the girls I went to high school in Nashville, Tennessee, but she sure sounds like him. She talks like him. Her perspective is like them. He starts doubting his mission. And I think that 17-year-old girl played a very critical role. I met her. She wasn't 17 when I met her. She's passed since that time. And she reviewed that first night with Robert Shivers. And her daughter is still a supporter of me. So very an emotional lunch with her. And how that girl changed, I think, changed history. Started waking up Shivers' eyes.
So your book, Picture Bride, is I know it's a novel, but it's based on the true story, right?
Yes, almost all, not all, but of these, what happens in the novel actually happened in real life. And at the end of the book, I explain which characters are fictional. The Takayama family, which is Haro, my picture bride, she's fictional. She's a creation of my imagination. But so many of the other characters, like Robert Shivers and Hemingway and the generals of the time, they're real people, and I use real quotations. So it's a living history, but I think it's more fun sometimes to put history in a novel because there's stories about people. How did Haro invent? You wonder how characters become invent. And Haro, which is the picture bride, I almost think of her as a living person, like she really did live. I think about her, and I know how she thinks. But I discovered her when my wife and I went to Sandakan, which is in Malaysia. And I wanted to go there because they have the orangutan reserve, and I thought it'd be very interesting. My wife wanted to go there to pay respect to a Japanese cemetery. And we had been to other cemeteries, mostly World War II, and the Japanese government does not take care of them very well, not like the American cemeteries. And so then I go in there, and I'm noticed I can't read the names there, but I can see the dates. They're in their 1898 and 1903. And I asked Tomoko, she says, oh yeah, these are girls. And what happened, the island of Amakusa, which we later visited, was infamous for sending their girls overseas. They were the comfort women of Asia at the time. And there's a book called Sandakan Brothel Number 8, written by a lady, another Tomoko. And she went there and interviewed one of the girls that came back. And I got to thinking these girls were heroes. They were 14, 15, 16 when they sent overseas. They had to pay off their mother's debt. So people who recruited them would pay their parents a nice amount of money, and the girls had to work it off. You would think the girls would be motivated to work as hard as they could for 2 or 3 years and pay it off and get out of the trade. They didn't do that. They sent money home so their parents could have a home, their brothers could go to school. And I said, my God. And many of them died very, very young. You can imagine the type of work that they were doing. And so I got thinking years later when I was going to write a book, what would happen if one of those girls from Amakusa at the last minute escaped her fate? And that girl becomes Taro. And she runs away, goes to Hiroshima, and where she's taken in by somebody who has a temple. And this is me talking to the head of the temple person in Hiroshima. The temple is still there. And I toured the temple, and I had all sorts of great revelations within me. You take a look at this bell over here, and I walked in there, I said, boy, this bell, there's got to be a story with this bell. And there is. There's a wake-up story when Haro, she's not part of the family. They want to send her maybe to an orphanage because they don't know what to do with this girl who shows up on their footstep. But she rings the bell at a critical time and ingratiates herself with the family. Another period of time, this here is a picture over here. It was a 700-year-old Buddha. And I was in there by myself, and it actually was a dark and rainy day. And I sat in my hunches. I don't know if I could do that today. And I looked at that person and this feeling of spirituality. And I said, this is a place that people come to make important decisions. And sure enough, when I got to writing, the most important decision Harold would have made up to that life is made in front of that. You have to read the novel to find out what the decision is, but she does end up in Hawaii, so that would give you a hint of what happens. So you never know when you travel. Oh, in the back of this here is interesting. It's the fox here. This is a Shinto shrine in the back of a Buddhist temple, and I won't go into all the details. But up until the Meiji times, Buddhists and Shintos shared the temples, the Buddhists being in charge, and then later after Meiji, the Shinto. But I don't want to get sidetracked into all that history. But those foxes led to another interesting part of the story that I don't know if we'll get in time today.
All of our viewers will have to read your book to kind of find out all the significance. So you wrote Picture Bride, and then your next book was A Question of Loyalty. So what's that book all about?
Well, that book is the key question of what happens during the war and for the Nisei. Who are the Nisei loyal to? Who are the Japanese loyal to? That was the question. That was the reason for the camps. Now, the real reason for the camps, you get underneath it, was economic, especially in the West Coast. The jealousy, anger, those people don't look like us. You know, it's almost like we're repeating history today, so I don't have to go too far with it. But the question of loyalty, that was the question. And so that's what the book is about, how the Nisei start to answer the question of loyalty. You know, they were kicked out when the war broke out after Pearl Harbor. Most of the ROTC were Nisei, 60 to 70%, because those were the student body. And so they were given guns, 5 bullets and a rifle they had never shot before. And they were guarding beaches, the telecommunications system, the governor's mansion. And then after 6 weeks, somebody from the mainland said, why, you know, did we lose the war? Ha ha ha, with all these Japanese soldiers with guns. And they were told in an early morning meeting that put your guns down and you're now aliens and go home. And that was a horrible type of thing. Again, a question of loyalty. So what did these guys do? They signed a petition that night to the governor and said, we will do anything, any type of work, dig ditches, whatever, to prove our loyalty. Can you imagine any other group coming back? Most of us would be angry, protesting, you know, burn a car, break in a building or something. But these guys didn't do that. They were just said, we're going to prove it. And of course they did. They created something called the Varsity Victory Volunteers, where 120 of the guys that guns were taken away did dig ditches. They were given uniforms, paid a salary. They lived on base, and that's a certain irony. They were actually on base in uniform, but instead of rifles, they had pickaxes and shovels. And later, after a year of doing this, Roosevelt had a second heartbreaking. His wife probably helped out. She saw these guys working, and they were allowed to join the military and the army. And so that story is then about these young men in both the mainland and Hawaii who served. And again, there was a question of their loyalty until the actual guns were shot.
Well, I think there's a lot of people, Japanese Americans, who were interned, who have kind of their own specific stories, and you writing this book, I think certainly will raise a lot of awareness to those people who may not know too much about what happened during the war. So we really appreciate you kind of connecting history and what happened 75 plus years ago to what's happening today too. So we appreciate you kind of putting kind of Japanese American history in the forefront for our communities. But I understand you have a third book out that will be published very soon. So
I wouldn't say very soon. I'm a very slow writer. I think we're talking a couple of years. I appreciate the enthusiasm. I'm a slow writer, and there's just a lot of details. I just had somebody edit part 1 of the book now. And I have the soldier, he's got to think a minute before he does something. So he hits the pause button. And my reader says, Mike, in 1939, 1942, you think people had a pause button? So maybe not. So I had to get rid of that one. So there's 100 things. Every paragraph, I have to remember, did this exist at that time? Or who said it? And so And fortunately, I do have people who will read my 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 material, and so my worst mistakes, the rest of the readers don't get it because somebody picks it up. So I have 3 or 4 professional Nisei Sansei readers that help me out to make me look a little bit better. You mentioned earlier that you weren't aware of the fighting in the training camps between the mainlanders and the Hawaiians. And that's a very interesting story. The Hawaiian boys, when they left Hawaii, they were giving lays, the monies were stuffed with pockets, everybody's relative wanted to get on there. Most of them, some of their parents had gone to POWs, but most of them were still on the island working and running businesses and so forth, but not certain businesses that were taken away from them. But they had a totally different mindset. And we know the men from the mainland, I don't have to tell you, they came from the camps. They didn't have any money. So you got these 2 groups together. And the Hawaiian boys are thinking, what are these sourpuss mainlanders? And then the mainlanders talked the King's English. The Hawaiian boys spoke this kind of a pidgin English, and the mainlanders made fun of them as being ignorant. So one thing leads to another, and there's fist fights, arguments back and forth, really nasty stuff. And finally, the commander was about ready to say, this isn't going to work. Maybe we can't do this. And so a person, chaplain, said, I have an idea. And what the idea was, suppose we send some of these Hawaiian happy-go-lucky boys to the camps. One of the boys that went to the camp was Danny Inouye. And here they are in the back of a flatbed. It's about a 4-hour trip. And they're going to meet the girls because some of the girls of the camps have come to their training center in Shelby, Mississippi, the USO type of thing. So they knew some of the girls, and they're singing songs. They're going to put a show on and so forth. And they turn down this dirt road, and you can see over here, they see this picture of a guard with machine guns pointing into the camp. Well, that shut everybody up. And then they went into the camp, and they saw the reality, the open toilets. People had to save money for weeks just to give these guys a decent meal. The small little rooms for a family that were up at the top. Somebody snored, everybody in the same barracks heard about it. And I don't want to go on and on about the camps. I think most of your readers are very much aware of it. But now the Hawaiian boy says, oh my God. So this is what Danny Inouye, in his book that he wrote, he said, I wonder what I would have done if it had been me and my parents inside that camp. Would I have volunteered for a country that betrayed me? Remember, we volunteered from a close-knit community that is generous and supportive of what we're doing. Our families haven't been forced out of their homes and herded into backward prisons, never knowing when it will end or what kind of life is possible when this camp nightmare ends. But those mainland boys volunteered while in those camps. And after that, when they got back, and there were several groups that did that, the fighting between the Katonks and Buddha Heads. Today, they joke about it and when they have the reunions, but in 1943 in Camp Shelby, once so damn funny.
Wow, that's amazing. So you went from question of loyalty to proof of loyalty, which is the one that you're working on right now. And I think
right.
It's maybe all relative, but hopefully sooner than later that we can all kind of enjoy your 3rd book. But can you tell us about kind of the 3rd edition of your series?
Yes, the 3rd book, this is really the fighting book. The last book, Question of Loyalty, the last part is the fighting, the last 6th part. This one's all about fighting. And we're going to take some of the marauders. There were 14 Japanese Nisei, MIS that were in Burma. Very exciting. I really enjoyed putting that one together. There was a World War II Nisei who was a bombardier. He was a machine gunner on airplanes that were flying over Germany. Very interesting story. I didn't know that we had anybody in the Air Force. It was an anomaly on how it happened, how he got in, but he did. And then later, he went to some of the camps that were having problems because of the questions 26 and 27. And he was not well received because he said he was really a loyal American and he looked forward to going in, flying over Japan and shooting down Japanese airplanes. So some of the people in the camps had conflicted thoughts about that. But anyway, that's rather remarkable story. We've got Nisei that were in MIS that were in the Philippines. I'm getting ready to write that one. And there were POWs. Right now, I'm writing a scene on the POWs. None escaped. None of the Nisei escaped. In fact, very few people escaped at all from the camps. But I've decided I'm going to have my Nisei change history a little bit, and they'll be an escape. And I have a scenario in mind how it'll happen. And I've asked readers on my Facebook if they want to have any ideas that might be better than mine, but I'll keep mine to my chest until I decide to put it in writing.
Very nice. I'm right there with you. So, so I know you try to make all your books and all your novels as authentic as possible. How much research and how much time does it go into kind of setting the story all up, and like from getting the idea initially in your head into getting it written and edited and published? How much time does each book take from kind of start to end?
Well, it takes me 3 or 4 years. Part of it is that I'm a slow reader and I have other things to do. But each scene has to be very precise. My background was not military. So when there's a fighting going on, I have to decide what kind of a rifle they had. And I had to make sure at that particular time, the rifle was in there. I have a scene with a walkie-talkie where they first came out in 1944. So I had to make sure I didn't use it in 1942. And then I had to put that into the scene. What type of telecommunication equipment? What about running wires? How do they communicate? I have a lot of scenes with forward observers, the 522nd Artillery support. Why was the 522nd Artillery the most accurate artillery in the history of the United States military? Part of it was the IQ of Nisei was phenomenal. They never had a group of soldiers. In fact, they were amazed, all the soldiers in Shelby, they never had a group like that before. Of course, that's the education mamas. If you're a Nisei in those days, you weren't slacking. You weren't thinking, did I do my homework tonight? That was not that consideration. So you had this group of people, and they were very good. And you had a Korean officer, not a Korean, American Korean. And his story is what, they told him, you don't want to be with these Nisei guys. He said, yes, I do. Otherwise, I'll be a paper pusher. But here I can be a fight. He has a way of moving the artillery closer than other people. And the accuracy of it was phenomenal. I explained how that happened. But I had to learn a lot about artillery. And the shells, when you have an artillery shell goes off, there's 7 different loads of gunpowder, like pads you put in. Of course, more pads, the further it goes. It has to be at a certain angle. What about the weather? What about the wind? And you got to have the map, somebody at the forward observer looking at the site, and they hit a practice shell to see how close they are. All this has to happen in minutes or seconds, because the other guy, when they see the other team, the Germans see a shell coming in with the tanks, they're going to start moving them. So you don't have a lot of time to go back. And there were no computers in those days, no iPhones or all these stuff that the guys have today in Iraq and Iran. So it was a phenomenal way they did that, but it took a lot of research. Fortunately, before they died, I had 2 guys that were forward observers, which is a very interesting type of thing. So everything has to be done. What about mosquito coils? Well, I could use that. And I was able to put that in there. I found out when mosquito coils were first coming. And there were other expressions I mentioned before, the pause button. So there were a lot of things like that. But it's a lot of fun. I'm by natural is a historian. In fact, I enjoy the research so much, it probably slows me down, because I say, wow, that's interesting. And then I read the whole thing.
Well, nice. Well, Mike, you kind of talked about all your books and kind of how you came to, I guess, be connected to Japan a little bit, but I understand you have an Atlanta and Georgia connection too. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I have to thank my wife for that. I have relatives in Atlanta, and we were living in Florida at the time. And I always told my wife, someday I would like to go, see a season with the Braves. And some years ago, about 5 years ago, she said, Mike, you're not getting any younger. And if you want to do this, we should do it. And she liked Atlanta. We visited there often. So we went up to Atlanta, and we were looking for a place to live. I was going to buy a place, and we're looking at our season tickets, where we're going to sit. and she notices there a big sign about apartments going to be built next to the new baseball stadium. And she comes, she says, I know how you hate driving and you complain about it every time when the game gets over. And she said, I don't want to hear about it. How about getting an apartment in the stadium? So we got not on second base, it was outside the gate, of course, but I could walk from my apartment to my seat behind home plate in 15 minutes. The deal was, though, I would get to go to get a 4-year program for the Atlanta Braves, and then we'd buy a home at Ebisu, because her dream, my dream was baseball, her dream was to have a home in Tokyo. And I love Tokyo, so it wasn't like, oh my God, I got to live in that crappy city. I love Tokyo. And so last year I closed down the apartment because the baseball game was over, and we bought a place in Ebisu, which is a great place to be. If anybody's been to Japan, just a lot of great restaurants and very friendly for foreigners. So it's and I don't speak a lot of Japanese, but I speak enough to, I won't starve to death and I can get home in a taxi, that kind of thing.
Wow, that's amazing that you have a footprint in Tokyo, in Hawaii, and then Atlanta, right? So you're a global man.
Yeah, and I used to until recently I did cruise ship lecturing. That's another reason I didn't get on my books. And I was the guy that did the historical background of a city. So I have about 50 different programs in different locations. And the ones I like the most, of course, are in Asia, in Hiroshima, which I do. I've done that many times. Very emotional. I don't talk about how many people died, but people know about that. But the build up to it, what the emperor was doing the night before. So I've always loved history. So when I'm writing history, it's been a passion of mine all my life. Even though I mean, in the corporate world, there's not a lot of money always in a historian, but so I was in the business world for 40 years.
All right, nice. Well, when you're not cheering for the Atlanta Braves or writing a book, or making kind of final edits before you publish your upcoming book, what do you do for fun? What are your hobbies?
Reading would be one of them. I say traveling. My wife and I have traveled. I've visited 204 countries and territories, about 160 of the countries in the United Nations, and then places like Guam, Pago Pago, the Vatican, places, Cayman Islands and so forth that are not countries, but I visited them. We visited Iran during the Kerry negotiations. So visited North Korea and Cuba within 90 days of each other, because I wanted to see the last two communist countries. And if you got any of your friends that think that socialism is the answer, visit North Korea for a week, and everybody is equal except the very top guys on the top. And they're equal in poverty, equal in being skinny. They have solved the cholesterol and obesity problem in North Korea. Other than Kim Jong-un, you don't see a lot of fat people in North Korea. Cuba, on the other hand, people are happy and they're fun. They're not really happy with the government, but very light touch. You could talk to people and they talk to you. In North Korea, nobody wanted to talk to you. You're with your guide all the time, but it's amazing. So we enjoy traveling. I have to say that's our hobby. We don't have children. My wife couldn't, so I guess travel has been the substitute for grandchildren and children.
Well, very nice. Well, before we end today's session, tell us where we can learn more about you. Where can people purchase your books? Can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, maybe your website, and then where people can actually get a hold of your books and read them?
Yeah, you can. I have several websites. You can go to Mike Malaghan Author, or just go to Question of Loyalty. Go in there. You can buy my book through there. The simplest thing, if you want to buy my book, is to go on Amazon. You can do it. But if you like an autographed copy, I'm in Hawaii now, and I always keep a couple of books of both. And if you just go to my Facebook, just Michael Malaghan, it's not a hard name, and send me a message. Or I'll give you my email. It's MGM, just like the casino, in my name, @Malaghan, and .net. And you go there and just say you want to get a book, or go to my, like I say, website and hit the message button and say you're interested in it. And trust me, I don't take long to get back to you.
Well, very nice. Well, thank you so much. And then to take us out, can you tell us some of your future goals, aspirations, whether it be kind of on a personal note or maybe kind of more on a professional kind of objective too. But yeah, tell us about kind of maybe some of your goals moving forward.
Well, at 78, my first goal is to do exercise an hour every day to maintain my health. And as you can imagine, I have some friends at my age who are not quite as mobile as I am, so that they motivate me sometimes. So that's probably number one, to keep exercising and watch what I eat. But yeah, we continue to travel. We have a 2-month cruise scheduled for next April, starting in Bangkok and ending up in Lisbon. I'll probably do one more private tour of some of the fighting in Ninise fighting in northern Italy. I have a couple of people that are eager to do it as soon as this COVID thing is. I might do that next year, spend a week to do that. So I'd say we continue our travel. We're very social people. We enjoy having people to the house, and we in Hawaii we have a lot of multicultural families. If you want to be prejudiced in Hawaii, it's really tough because everybody's a minority. So who are you going to be prejudiced against? We half the island is something besides Christian, and yet everybody loves the Christmas decorations at the city hall with the nativity scene. I was thinking, in some places, I'm going to give you a pitch for Hawaii. There are some states that say the nativity scene in public property is, it's not right because it's a church and state. Hawaii, which has all sorts of, Taoists and Buddhists and Shinto and what have you, everybody loves the nativity scene. We just think, isn't it wonderful that we can share each other's cultures? And nobody ever suggests, well, should that be there or not? Of course it should be there. Everybody loves the spirit of Christmas. But we also have the spirit of Oban. Everybody has Oban during August. Everybody goes to the park and celebrates Oban. And not everybody dances, but a lot of people get out there and dance, and the taiko drums are going. So it's an interesting cultural experience living in Hawaii.
Wonderful. We'll definitely have to celebrate our kind of cultural similarities and differences, and cherish all of our kind of things that we celebrate together, right? So, but for all of us, kind of everyone tuning in, definitely check out Mike Malaghan's website. MikeMalaghan.com. You can look at Picture Bride. You can order it on the website, or A Question of Loyalty. And certainly, Mike also shared his email address. So if you wanted an autograph copy, definitely reach out to him. But we'll be actually doing a kind of more in-depth program about kind of Japanese American kind of history here in the U.S. With Mike a little later on. So definitely tune in for that program. But at this time, Mike, any final messages? Thanks so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll get together again in person.
Yeah, Yoshi, just thank you and Georgia Society to have me come on like this. It's a great opportunity for an author, and you guys have a great program, and I look forward next fall to have a booth there and talk to some of the people there face to face.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much. And hopefully we'll get to visit you in Hawaii sometime. But hopefully maybe the Braves will make it to the World Series and come visit us too, right? So
looking good. We won last night.
That's right. So stay healthy, take it easy, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Yoshi.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.